This final panel brings us full circle. Looking at how education serves as a global bridge for democracy, diplomacy, and social transformation. It is hosted by the School of Education at American University, and this conversation will explore how universities can keep the doors of learning open amid global crisis. I want to especially thank my colleagues at the School of Education, so many here in the room that really helped design this panel, recruit for this panel, and then bring as many people as possible to the panel. And it's definitely something that, you know, we wanted to spend time on. I'm going to introduce each of the panel members, and when I'm done, we'll ask them to come up on stage. And can I just say a personal point? I would like to thank the Dean of the School of Education, Ronnie Hopkins, who's a good colleague. We get into some good trouble now and again, you and I. So I just want to thank you for all you do to support SIGN. And we really love not only being neighbors now in the building together, but also to work on what we're doing now and what we'll be doing in the future. So thank you. It's an honor for me to bring together this panel. First, we are going to be moderated by Courtney Wright, whose title is Civic Designer and Training Specialist at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm told is an AU alum. We are so excited that she is going to be helping us design this conversation today. And then Ernesto Castaneda, he's a professor and the director for the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies and the Immigration Lab here at American University. I want to thank him for being here. On a personal note, we have done so much work together, and we are continuing to do work together. It's always great to partner with him. We'd like to also welcome Professor Justin Hansford, professor and then director at the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center at Howard University. And then we'd also like to certainly introduce Professor Elizabeth Worden here at the School of Education at American University. We are so delighted that you're all here with us. If you can come up to the stage now, we would love to start the conversation. Thank you.
As our group gets started, again, welcome. Thank you, Amy, on behalf of the School of Education for believing that we could put together a partnership like this. We are excited about it, and also the appropriate title related to solutions, considering the need maybe to bring up problems, sometimes intractable, sometimes unresolved, but thanks for having us to lean forward with thinking about solutions. So we're looking forward to it. We're really excited about the panel today. I'm Rodney Hobson, again, Interim Dean for the School of Education. I was asked to introduce Courtney briefly, and I'll do so, and also just remind you that we are excited in the School of Education about some events coming up. We'll be named shortly, as you well know, thanks to the lovely transformative gift of a current faculty member, and will be renamed the Linda A. and H. Kent Baker School of Education in the spring. As part of that, part of the strategic priorities right now is really to feature some partnerships and some really important ideas for speaking to why we need to be the type of school of education we are right now. So let me introduce Courtney and move to the side and listen to this great panel. Courtney's an ITEP 2020 alum. She's a civic designer, as you heard, and training specialist at the Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation at Johns Hopkins, where she partners with city government, teams to design and implement programs that advance civic education, engagement, and equitable outcomes for residents. With 15 years of experience in nonprofits, leadership development and program strategy, Courtney has built structures that strengthen learning, collaboration, and institutional capacity across all sectors and all levels. Thank you again, Courtney, for moderating.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start by just doing an impromptu, everybody take a deep breath and exhale and relax. I know it has been a day And we are going to have a conversation this afternoon, and I want to make sure that everybody is feeling comfortable and ready to jump into our topic. So my style as a facilitator is very relaxed, so I would love for you all to join me in being relaxed as we move through today's conversation. So, good afternoon and welcome to Big Ideas That Matter, a podcast thought leadership series from the American University School of Education in collaboration with the Sine Institute of Policy and Public Solutions Summit. This series explores the question we believe every change maker should ask: why this big idea now? Education is one of the most powerful connectors we have, a force that builds bridges between people, culture, and nations. But in times of conflict and instability, those bridges can become fragile. Today's conversation asks how higher education can serve as a catalyst for democracy, diplomacy, and social transformation, not just through what we teach, but how we lead, partner, and adapt. We're honored to host this panel of leaders whose work exemplifies education as a form of diplomacy and transformation. Of course, they have already been introduced, but I am super honored to be here with three colleagues alongside of me. I'm going to ask that you join me in welcoming our panelists: Dr. Ernesto Castaneda, Director of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies and the Immigration Lab at American University; Justin Hansford, Director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center and Professor of Law at Howard University; and Dr. Elizabeth Worden, Professor of Education here at American University, whose research examines civic education and post-conflict learning. Together, we'll explore how higher education acts as a global bridge, connecting research, justice, and diplomacy in ways that sustain democracy and human connection. Now, before we dive in, the Big Ideas That Matters podcast always starts here. In 30 seconds or less, what's giving you hope right now?
Thank you, Courtney, for having me. What gives me hope right now is that we have evidence that not everybody agrees. And that's a good thing, because actually when everybody agrees on something, then there's no fun, right? There's nothing to debate and all that. And it's good to debate about values, about goals, about strategies. And universities have to foster that debate too, in a civic way. But what is unique to the university, what we have a competitive advantage in doing, is actually bringing facts, numbers, empirical reality to that conversation, so we have something to converge around and then discuss around that diversity of ideas and viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have to say, one thing that has not given me hope is the Washington Commanders. For those natives to Washington, you know, but one thing that is giving me hope is the feeling that people around the world are open to change. I have to say that the New York mayor's race in particular was something that gave me a lot of hope, because it showed that people are open to trying to find new solutions in politics, and it's such a needed possibility that we have other options on the table at this particular time in history.
Thanks you all for having me. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you to my students who are here. I so appreciate it. Okay, so Justin, the Commanders are not giving you hope, but I think you just need to look even at some other teams that are native to Washington. The Washington Spirit, the women's soccer team, is second in the nation, and they are playing the semifinals this weekend, and it's an amazing group of women that are giving me hope. And I just look for the things in my everyday life and those small things that give me hope, and the Washington Spirit's awesome.
Thank you for sharing what's giving you hope. It's our way of just tapping into our collective resilience before diving deep into today's episode topic. Now let's get into topic: higher education as a catalyst for democracy, diplomacy, and social transformation. This question is going to be for all panelists. We're living in an era where education is not just about degrees. It's about democracy, belonging, and global connection. What does education as diplomacy mean to you, and why does that idea matter now?
In higher education, we're really lucky in the sense that people from around the country and around the world come to our universities to study together. And then you face diverse staff and faculty. So there's gonna be disagreements, there's gonna be new things, but most importantly, you're gonna face difference in a way that you have to, because you're sharing a classroom, you're sharing a dorm room, you're sharing a club, and therefore you will know what you didn't know about, which is very important, right? How other people see the world. And that's something that college gives you the opportunity, and in a way forces you to do it. It's not always easy, but it's something that you're gonna take for the rest of your lives, the learnings in terms of other cultures, other backgrounds that you get in college. And something that for the students in the audience, it's very important that not because you graduate, either undergrad or graduate, whatever degree you take with us or other place, never say that you're gonna stop learning, that you're gonna never read a book again. I sometimes hear people joking about that, but some people actually do that. Reading in the US is going down. A lot of the polls show that depending on education and then how much people keep learning after they graduate, the way they think. And again, it's very dangerous for democracy where people become very solidified in their views. So if we can instill at AU critical thought and the desire to learn and to be curious, we have done our job. And the last thing is that at AU, faculty, staff, conveners, we can be bridge builders and bring different people together. So something that I do in my work is I translate. I translate in 3 ways. In my case, mainly from Spanish to English and vice versa, but also culturally, how immigrants are seeing things differently than the locals. There was a poll released by Univision today that was saying that while Latinos in the US felt belonging to America, 60% of them 2 years ago, today is less than 41%. And then we discussed that, why that may be the case, right? So it's important for us to make a home for all of our students and to have those difficult discussions, in this case at AU, because if we're successful here, then we can apply this in our larger polity. But if we cannot do it here and self-govern and share ideas, share goals, it's gonna be very hard for us to be good citizens. Thank you.
Yes, well, another one of the hats I wear is working with a group called the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. I've been a part of that body for 5 years, and we're part of the UN Human Rights Commission. And so at the UN, there's a lot of diplomacy going on, and a lot of people recognize that you can't thrive and get your way through force or through coercion. You have to have people come together and make agreements. But I have found in my short stint, where I have seen governments come and try to negotiate and try to work together to solve problems, especially problems around things like racial injustice that might be happening around the globe. A global issue of racism is something that we're continuously aware of. I have found that oftentimes governments have barriers when it comes to discussing these problems and finding ways to collaborate. Political barriers, economic barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers. But I have found that the students, oftentimes, when I'm able to bring students from Howard University or even scholars from Howard University to those same tables, that problem-solving experience is completely different. And some of those intractable political barriers are, at least for the time being, put to the side when people explore ways to exchange ideas, explore ways that partnerships could thrive, especially scholars, but oftentimes, to reiterate, even students who are able to, through cultural exchange, build community with each other and have really genuine, authentic conversations that are not as scripted as some of the diplomatic conversations have been. So in terms of my experience of seeing the barriers that diplomacy faces when it comes to international cooperation, solving problems like climate, solving problems like racial injustice, solving problems around global healthcare systems that are failing people of African descent around the world, I have found that scholars and students and university actors are often able to be more collaborative and more open and more willing to work together to find solutions sometimes than the government actors and diplomats who have to really stick to the script.
Great, that's so much to think about there. They gave us some of the questions in advance. When I've been thinking about this idea of education is diplomacy and then asking what I think about it, it's a really challenging question right now. My field is international education. And if you had asked me this a year ago, or even maybe 6 months ago, I would have said, well, of course, the role that higher ed plays is in international students. They come here to study. That's a profound form of global diplomacy. I would have talked about training young people to go work abroad with international development. That's something that my program has done here at AU for decades. But now, in light of today's political landscape and the loss of USAID and the discouraging visa regulations for international students for coming, that's all changed. That's all had a negative impact on my field and how I think about higher ed for global diplomacy. And so while we need to rethink that space and think about how we're going to meet that challenge, I don't have any easy answers now. It's such a changing landscape. But what we can do in the meantime is renew our emphasis and renew our enthusiasm and focus on students from North America going abroad, American students here going and studying abroad. We know that there is that can have a very positive impact both on students studying and the communities, the host communities where they live and study. And I think that's where we can put our efforts in a real concrete way to maintain, this ideal of higher education for diplomacy in a global context. And I know AU Abroad has just a wonderful program, and they've been a real positive force for that. And so let's not forget about them in this changing landscape.
Thank you. I appreciate you all sharing your how your experience has shaped your lens around education as a tool for diplomacy. I want to just zone in a little bit more. How are higher education institutions uniquely positioned to protect democratic values amid polarization and instability?
Right, so for sure there's polarization, but again, it will be more dangerous to have a unique thought. So the polarization can be decreased by doing research. So some of the research we have done is that, for example, when we talk about immigration discourses, there's a minority of people that are very loud in their anti-immigrant discourse, but most people actually are much more tolerant and welcoming of immigration. There's a recent Gallup survey that shows that 79% of Americans see immigration as something positive today. But if you go through the news coverage, you wouldn't imagine that. So something that I always remind my students and collaborators is that by definition, journalists, if they're doing their job well, they're gonna cover the extraordinary, the special, the fringe cases, we'll call it the outliers in statistics. That's their job, right? Because what happens every day is not news, it's just everyday life. So the job of anthropology, sociologists, geographers, and other social scientists is actually remind us of what is actually the norm, what is the most common thing that happens. And to bring into these public discussions a larger context, precedents, history, and putting things in proportion, right? So something that is, again, very important to know, but very few people know, is that in the world, there's only 3.5% of the global population that lives in a country different than the one they were born in. So migration is it's a lot of drama, a lot of lives are lost in the Mediterranean, in the deserts, etc. But it's a minority experience in the US history or world history today. But again, it's something that we had always had in our history, and we're gonna keep migrating regardless of what policies we put in the books. So that's what the power of academia does, that we have similar conclusions coming from different disciplines, from different universities, from people of different backgrounds. Then if we are kind of converging on a point, that's something that we have to translate, communicate to the public. That's another important translation, that what we learn at our universities doesn't stay here, but becomes applied, becomes well-known, and becomes part of public discussion. So that's our role to play in a healthy democracy.
Yes, so going back to my experience at the UN, one of the mandates of the Permanent Forum is to accumulate disaggregated data on people of African descent. There are some countries in different parts of the world, France, some countries in Latin America, that don't keep data on their populations in a way that's disaggregated by their racial background. And so we don't even know the exact demographics. Now, of course, the problem with that is it becomes more difficult to measure different disproportional rates of educational access, housing, healthcare, poverty. So, there are a lot of programs that we depend on to try to have data-driven solutions to inequality that cannot exist in contexts where that data doesn't exist in the first place. So one of the initiatives that we have undertaken at this UN entity is called the Black Audit. So we are having people from around the world and analyze the state of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in a way that is disaggregated by determining who is of African descent in that country. And the important part here is that it's been driven more than anything else by universities. In countries where the state cannot collect this data and they cannot disaggregate this data, universities can disaggregate the data. And so by being able to give us access to the data on the ground, we then are able to help craft data-driven solutions. And believe it or not, it's also something that we have now imported, so to speak, here even in the United States. The goal is to go to 40 different states here in the US and also find the same disaggregated data when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals for Black people in the United States. So these solutions are not only driven oftentimes by universities, both in the international sector and in the domestic sector, but then the subsequent exchange can lead to initiatives that create social change on both sides of an international discourse.
Oh, wow. So I have so many questions about that, but I'm going to bring it back really local. And Courtney, your question was examples of universities bridging divides through dialogue and learning, and I'll just say it, liberal arts, right? Some of the stuff we're doing right here at AU is doing that. And this year, I am the co-lead for our new freshman seminar program called Encounters. The first semester, which I'm the lead for, and my colleague Keith Leonard from the Literature Department is the lead for the second semester in the spring. The first semester, we are looking at origins and purposes of higher education, in part through having students look at documents in the AU archives. And then we're also studying scholars, reading scholarly work with contrasting views of higher ed and what higher ed means, purposes of higher ed. We have scholars that differ on issues like affirmative action. Many of my students in my class don't agree with these scholars. And what we're doing in our classroom, and it's so exciting, is talking about and learning how to disagree with scholars, right? You don't have to agree with everything. And then how do we disagree with each other? And how do we do that respectfully? And how do we dialogue? And that is happening in my Encounters class, and I've heard from colleagues it's happening in their Encounters classes as well. And I have to say, in my 18 years of being at AU, this is one of the best things that I've done. It has brought me so much joy and optimism that, okay, we can learn to dialogue. We can learn to talk in this age when we're ready to dismiss some of the younger generations as being, having knee-jerk reactions, always being on their phones. I'm like, no, these are really thoughtful young people that can do this work. And I think a liberal arts education and having spaces like this helps. And the next semester, they will deepen all of these skills in a seminar on James Baldwin, where they'll, again, learn to dialogue, engage, practice. We also have a great class called The Examined Life, where students think deeply about what it means to have a good life. And they might disagree on it. And they might disagree with Aristophanes, who they're reading about what it means to have a good life. And I find that exciting. It makes me smile. And it's just one really small local example of crossing bridges.
Right, that's very important. Yeah.
Thank you. I've enjoyed listening to you because some of the key points that I've pulled out and just hearing what you all have shared is that higher education allows for there to be a space for nonpartisan discourse where people are able to just learn about what is there and then utilizing data to inform information to have the dialogues needed to move forward. And so when we make those connections and we put people into these institutions, they're able to drive the democracy and the diplomacy that's needed to allow some of the depolarization work to happen. So I appreciate you all sharing kind of at a higher level how higher education institutes support democracy. I want to take it a little bit down a level into practice, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious. All right, you all have said these great things, but what does this look like in reality? So I'm going to start with you, Ernesto. Your work at AU's Immigration Lab and with the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies intersects directly with global movement and belonging. How can education act as a stabilizing and empowering force for migrant and refugee communities?
And thank you, Courtney. So what we do in the lab, and we call it a lab because we have a lot of students, AU and beyond, at all levels, from all schools and disciplines, that themselves interview immigrants, refugee, and asylum seekers. So in interviewing people from different backgrounds, or similar backgrounds to themselves if they share a language, but they still with different experiences sometimes to theirs, or experiences similar to their parents or grandparents. So they are able to kind of create an empathy directly with our immigrant communities here in Tenleytown, all around Washington, and some people that are from New York City have also interviewed hundreds of people in New York City. So it's a way to leave the ivory tower and actually ask the people that we often hear about in the news or that we publish about to actually get our data from their own experiences. And we have so far, since the pandemic, collected 415 in-depth interviews that we're trying to share the stories of these individuals. So we have students in the translation, in the languages departments help us with translation. We have students helping us with the write-ups. We have also a podcast. We have a lot of ways that we're trying to communicate this out. So it's a great way to engage students in research, so they know if they like it or not and what it takes, and regardless of their background, that they can become researchers and they can have a PhD and become professors or do research in other scenarios. So that's a way to do it. We also we have a lot of students from minorities or immigrant backgrounds that sometimes they feel that they don't belong in school, that is not for them. It is, but they don't know that, and it's hard for them to have that feeling. So when we validate that what they know about what's happening in their communities, what they went through coming as international students or as immigrants from other countries or from other parts of the U.S., we validate that they are coming with knowledge that is valuable, and they can also teach me as a professor. They can teach me things. I'm learning from them, and most importantly, they're learning from each other. So that's something very empowering. And then in terms of the, higher education has always been a way for social mobility. So if we have an important middle class of Italian origin, Irish origin in New York City, and other origins, is thanks to the public universities in New York. And right now, the children of Mexican immigrants who are citizens, 52% of the women are graduating with a degree in New York. So meaning New York City now has a local Mexican population, Mexican-American first-generation college student, that is equal to those of the people that escaped Poland and Russia, escaping the pogroms, Jewish people. So it's a very, very, it's above average, which is in the 40s. So New York City is doing something right. So the challenge is how in New York, in Washington, D.C., all the different regional universities can do something so that the children of Afghans that have been here now for a little while, the children of Salvadorians, of Guatemalans, or the different communities that are established, Ethiopians that are established in the DMV, can have an access to become part of the middle class, studying with Americans from other backgrounds. So that's something that we have been successful in the past, and I think AU is more conscious about trying to do that into the future, and our alumni that are also increasingly diverse help us do that. Thank you.
Thank you for creating spaces for people to be seen and heard. It's appreciated. Justin, at the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, you're shaping legal and civic leaders. How can law and education together serve as a form of diplomacy, advancing justice within and across borders?
So it's hard to follow that excellent example. I will again talk about what we call the Black Audit Project. So each of the past 4 years, I've taken Howard University law students to the United Nations to present on their semester-long research project, which was to use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals framework. As you know, there are 17 different Sustainable Development Goals around access to clean water, housing, healthcare, education, employment, and we take those UN international standards and we apply those to each of the students' hometown, and we ask them to take a snapshot of the state of people of African descent in Houston, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, and note any disparities that might be present using these international goals, note any historical structural reasons for those disparities, have a town hall meeting in that in their hometown, and speak to local community leaders and learn about solutions, and then go back to the UN at the end of the semester and interact with people on this global stage so that you can exchange with them not only an understanding of some of the problems that you share on a global level with people throughout the world, but also some of the solutions that you can ideate together and try to bring those home to your hometown. So what's happening in that project is learning, and what I think is important when we talk about the internationalization of these higher education projects, you're building relationships with people at the UN, and you're taking the concepts that have been created on these global platforms and bringing them back home so that you can understand and really feel how relevant these concepts are to your day-to-day life in a place that's so personal as where you grew up or where you went to church or where your family is from. So that project has been very rewarding for myself. I know some of the students have gone on to work in international spaces even after graduation based on the relationships they made at the United Nations there. And this is just one example of how it's not only the exchange of just hard data and basic information that is so enriching in these international contexts, but it's the relationships and it's even the frameworks. It's a framework like the UN Sustainable Development Goals framework is a platform which can help people from many different countries, again, countries that may not even get along, right? We've interacted with countries that may not necessarily be seen as the greatest friends of the United States, but the young people in these countries and the young people at my university were able to talk about this UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we're willing to support each other in the campaign to create more equality. And creating more equality will make a better world for all of us, and a more safe world and a more peaceful world. And I think that will help to move forward diplomacy and also human rights around the world. So I'm very, very thankful for the project, and I do think that universities can take more of these data-driven experiences as a baseline for education domestically, even in their own classrooms. And then once you take it outside of your classroom to these international platforms, you'll find that there are more enriching ideas, more enriching relationships, excitement for the students because they get a chance to travel and meet people from different backgrounds, and ultimately you get some really positive outcomes.
Great. Thank you for creating spaces for your students to have that greater exposure. It sounds like they go on to do amazing things afterwards, which speaks to the impact of that opportunity. Elizabeth, your research often focuses on civic education in post-conflict environments. What can we learn from how other nations use education to rebuild trust, repair communities, and sustain democracy?
And I love talking about this. Is that working? All right. Thanks, Justin. Oh, that's better. So for, over 20 years, I've been researching and thinking about how to teach citizenship in societies undergoing transition, largely in the former Soviet Union and in Northern Ireland. And I have two ideas from Northern Ireland. Maybe some other will come out from the former Soviet Union. In Northern Ireland, well, let me just start from the beginning. Schools of education at universities are so important for teaching citizenship, for civic education, for democracy. You know why? Because they teach the teachers that are going to be in the classrooms, who are going to teach citizenship to students. And we forget that point, right? We get so caught up in thinking about, I don't know, research or stuff at the upper level. We just forget that, we're teaching the teachers who are going to teach citizenship. So in Northern Ireland, a divided society still after 30 years of conflict known as the Troubles that ended in 1998, at Ulster University, where I've spent a lot of time, all teacher education students, those are teacher candidates, have to take a module either in religion or citizenship education. Both religion and citizenship education are required classes in high school in Northern Ireland. So teacher candidates from like home ec, from like the art department, all have to learn how to teach citizenship or religion, but we're gonna focus on citizenship. And what that looks like then in the classroom, when these teacher candidates graduate and go teach, is that you might have an art teacher teaching the citizenship class. You might have a science teacher teaching it. And I observed a physics teacher doing a citizenship lesson, and it was fantastic. She was doing this lesson in her lab around benches, and all the students were learning about citizenship in a science classroom. And why shouldn't they, right? Citizenship and learning about democracy and being democratic is not confined to a history classroom or a civics classroom like we do in the US, but you can learn about it in all these spaces because you will live it and enact it in all these spaces in your life in a democratic society. And I don't know why we don't do that here. I don't know why in the US teaching citizenship is confined to social studies. It doesn't have to be, and I think that's a lesson we can learn from Northern Ireland in thinking about how we prepare teachers to teach citizenship, how higher education is that conduit for democracy and democratic stability. And then the other lesson from Northern Ireland that I've been thinking a lot about, especially today in our increasingly polarized, it's so cliche now to say, our increasingly polarized society, is the two main education initiatives that have been the most successful in Northern Ireland at bridging divides. The two are called integrated education and shared education, were developed and implemented and also later evaluated by faculty at two different universities in Northern Ireland, and they were in it for the long haul. These programs have been going on for decades. These are groups of faculty that have worked with parents, educators, community members for decades and created really successful, sustainable initiatives in Northern Ireland. And so that's a lot for us to think about as faculty members and professors, like how do we do this in a sustained way? How do we do this given the demands of publications and getting citation counts and turning research around so it can be usable and it can be consumable, right? So how do we commit to something for the long term in our communities that can be a project, that can be something successful at bridging divides? So those are my two examples from Northern Ireland, and I really like to think about those, and we can talk more about them later.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate the enthusiasm that you have around it, and I also appreciate just being able to look at deconstructing the box that we've put civic education in and not leaving it just in the social studies classrooms for where we engage with that understanding. Being able to expand it across spaces will allow for people to see how integral it is into every aspect of their life. I have a follow-up question for you all because you gave some very clear examples of how this has shown up in your work. But when we think about who might be listening and who's here in this space, what is something that they can do in order to help facilitate diplomacy in using higher education as a catalyst or higher education adjacent spaces?
Well, all of you here affiliated with American University or your universities are walking ambassadors of us and of higher education. So there's a lot of sympathy for the figure of the student, and I think that's respected and people want to help you out. But also you're representing the benefits of higher education beyond getting skills, which we talk about during the day, and beyond getting a job, which I understand is very important. And believe me, once you get a job, you're gonna use a lot of the things that you learned at AU, even in things that were outside of your majors, probably especially those. And then you're gonna have a richer life just because you went to college. So even if it takes a while now to get a job, that's not the fault of higher education. There's other issues bigger that are affecting that. So you're ambassadors of higher education. So to people that didn't have the luck to go to college or beyond, tell them what you learn in terms of coming up with diversity, overcoming adversity, and all these things that you may take for granted and you share with people that went to college that other people didn't, and that's what they are missing out. Not only the knowledge and the degrees and all that, but also the experiences. And let me give you a quick example from colleagues that I think is an example of what you can do. It's not me, but it's a very nice story. So there are some colleagues in the World Languages and Cultures who were doing a course with people in Chile in South America. So they will be teaching the course normally, but it was in a way cross-listed. It's in the same time zone, more or less. So the classrooms will meet together many of the weeks of the semester in this case. And then the students will get to know each other, and then we'll do some of the assignments together with half of the people in Washington and half of the people in Santiago de Chile. But okay, there was an exam before and after, and that's what I really share with you. So before, they asked the people in Chile particularly if they were people that we're talking about young people, right? If there were people that were curious about people with from different origins, with different cultures, different languages, and only 44% said that they were interested in that. Actually, I think it was a little lower. And then after they took the class, 4 months, then it had gone up to close to 70%. So why does that matter? Because first of all, in Chile right now, it's a country that used to have very little international migration until a few years ago. And right now there's election time and migration is the #1 issue. And there's a lot of very nasty xenophobic language. They're not used to this. They think there's indigenous people, there's Afro-Chileans, but it's a minority. So the stereotype is that everybody shares a history, ethnic group, and all that, and they don't want people coming from neighboring countries. But the students that were in this class, not only they open, and now they are curious and trying the food of the Venezuelan restaurants that are opening, the Colombian restaurants, the Haitian restaurants opening in Chile after meeting people, because meeting students from American university, it wasn't always the stereotype of the blonde, tall person of English origin that is Protestant. That is, I don't know, 40% of the population. So they met a lot of people of Latin American origin that doesn't speak Spanish, or people with Latin American origin that speak Spanish. They met people from Asia, from Africa, from all these backgrounds. So that made them want, and they got used to this diversity, and now they see that as a strength of America that we take for granted, but it's something that people in colleges, in our universities, they don't have, because the groups that are marginalized still have no access to higher education. So that was a big takeaway from those students, and that's, again, something that came organically, and that students just taking a class, they were changing the minds, opening the minds of people in the other hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere.
Thank you. Justin?
That was a great answer. I think I'm just going to build off of what you just said, because I was a Fulbright scholar in South Africa, and I was there at a time when there was a great deal of xenophobic violence taking place. And I did realize that when I met people, not just in the university, but throughout the society, they did see me as an ambassador, even though I was just a student. So the educational platform allowed me. At the time I was studying at Wits University in Johannesburg. The educational platform of being in the university there allowed me a chance to interact with people and talk to them about the phenomena of xenophobia that was taking place there. What were the drivers of it? And as someone who's connected with higher education, out of all of the different migrants in the society, I have to say I was likely the least threatening of the migrant. And being connected with the academy is a privilege that allows you access, and when you serve as like you said, as a diplomat, as an ambassador to these other places, you get a chance to leave a positive impression, of course. And as students, you get a chance to be someone who begins to engage in the practice of speaking on behalf of your community and speaking to people from other parts of the world and clearing up misunderstandings. And I can tell you, especially as an African American, there were many times where people had one image of African Americans, and then they see someone who is a scholar or a professor, not like the person they may have seen in a rap video or something like that. Now they have to change their mental model. And it's amazing how simply the presence of someone on the higher education platform can provide people with I say reality check, but for them it's a window into an entirely different reality that they don't have access to. And I found that to be the case in too many different contexts around the world where where I had to, whether I wanted to or not, I had to represent and be an ambassador and leave people with either a good taste in their mouth or a bad taste in their mouth based on their interactions with me, which I did understand would go on to change how they saw people, from my community for years to come. So but I think for young people, for students in that environment, and also for professors, I think oftentimes when you travel, when you interact, at least for me, I know I was there to almost take. I was there to learn and to gain from the experience, but I didn't enter the experience thinking that I was also someone who was giving an impression and someone who was serving as an ambassador. And if I had known that beforehand, maybe I would have prepared differently, and maybe I would have had some talking points, and maybe I would have been more in the mind state of serving as an ambassador while on a study abroad program. But I hope that's something that we can integrate into our exchanges, because I do think that plays a major part in helping us to communicate and avoid conflicts and misunderstandings between peoples.
Thank you.
Both tall acts to follow there. And Courtney, in thinking about, advice, or like, how do we be resilient in this time? How can education be resilient? I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 90s in Moldova, the former Soviet Union, and it was so bleak and it was so cold. It was during the Russian financial crisis, and I was freezing all the time. But I worked with teachers who had just been through 50 years of communism, and I would ask them, like, how did you do it? How did you do that? And then how are you doing this? And I think for many of us that are struggling, like, how are we going to do this? It's just because we keep showing up every day. And we just put one foot in front of the other, and we remain open and curious. And I show up and I teach my first-year students, and we work on dialogue. And I'm always looking to learn new things. I always tell them, help me think differently. What is something I haven't thought of, right? And so I think that's for all of us in this moment of thinking about how we can, in the space of higher ed, space of education, be resilient. How can we foster resilience? Let's just keep showing up one day at a time, staying true to our values and who we are, which will be different for all of us in this room. But just keep on keeping on.
Thank you. I don't know about you all. I am inspired, and I feel extremely privileged to be sitting up here with these esteemed professionals with deep knowledge. And I'm sure I can continue asking the questions, but I don't want to hog the space. So I'm going to open it up for people in the room who are curious or have a desire to ask a question at this time of our panelists. We have folks coming around with mics, so feel free to raise a hand or pop up.
Thank you. My name is Devorah Bendaway, and I'm a first year at American University. So you talked a lot about higher education as a catalyst for democracy and diplomacy, but we're seeing an attack on higher education, and like the middle class is kind of stressed. The working class kind of sees it as a fairy tale, and people are losing hope in higher education. So how can we combat that and make like the public restore their faith in higher education?
Great question.
Thank you. So that's part of the ambassador's part that I meant to say and I didn't say it. Help us make the case that universities matter, that we should remain open, that research matters, that the government and private actors should fund research, that is an investment into the future, it's not wasted money, and that all majors have their value and their use, from philosophy to law to technical things. So that's one thing. And then, yes, we're under attack. So it's not the time to be shy and to live in the ivory tower. We have to say, no, this is our value, this is our contribution to society, this is our views on X and Y topic, I do research on migration, so I participate. I think it's my duty to participate in public discussions on migration. So there's more evidence-based discussion than just with stereotypes and assumptions and myths. So it's something that we cannot do, and we have to do more. And Dr. Anna Burley said earlier, we cannot be afraid, because we're already targets, so we might as well act collectively and define ourselves, again, in a solution way. We're offering the solutions based on the work that we do. We can contribute to what's happening to help the middle class and the lower class that indeed are stressed.
It's a great question. I'll admit, I never thought of higher education as an aspect of diplomacy. I don't think until I came to this panel, I hadn't thought of higher education as an aspect of diplomacy. So I know that in the public sphere, it's unlikely that people are looking at an attack on higher education as being something that is also an attack on the image that our nation is projecting around the world. But of course, that is what is happening. And we could have a separate discussion about the state of the State Department. But at this stage in history, I do think that it is significant for people to understand the role that our higher education institutions play in America's public image globally. And it's really, I think it's understated and underappreciated. And and that goes both from study abroad and reaching out, but also for the people who come to our institutions from other parts of the world and receive an impression of our country based on their impression of their life on campus. So their life on campus determines how they feel about this country, and then these people who are coming are usually people who are leaders globally. So there is a story to tell there that perhaps you can be the one to tell to the public, because I think very few people in the public make that connection. And once more people connect the dots, perhaps we can see more of a groundswell in protecting our universities.
I don't have anything to add, although I will note that Deborah is a first-year AU student, so she's already thinking deeply about these things, so kudos to Deborah.
Thank you. One more.
Thank you, first of all. Really appreciate the initiatives mentioned, the data. I think it is very inspirational, and really appreciate these initiatives. I guess my question is, actually having come from the diplomacy sphere, how do you scale these initiatives to counter sort of the disinformation, the negative messaging narratives that are out there? What would be your advice to policymakers to be able to, say, scale these initiatives to counter a lot of the negative messaging that is out in the public that gains so much more airspace, to be able to have that greater, broader impact and bring it to scale?
Thank you, Miki. That's a great question. In terms, I started the immigration lab, and a lot of research centers in universities work in the same way, because as a faculty member, I have so many hours in the day, right? So I have done research on my own. I've gone to other countries, interview immigrants. It takes a lot of time and effort, and now I have a family, a job, etc. So what I have done is that with these students that volunteer at the immigration lab, around 40 per semester, we can bring this to scale. So we're interviewing people from Afghanistan, people from Ukraine, people from Haiti, people in different languages that I don't speak. We're able to reach them because we're doing it at scale. And we're working on 3 different books right now with different groups of students to get those stories out as soon as possible, not following the academic. My previous academic books have taken me 7 years of work. So it's a long time for issues that are pressing. And then we try to do blogs, we try to talk to the media so that we don't follow the academic clock that can be really slow. And then something that I value is invitations like today, because you can reach wider publics. And when you have a group of people like today, or people that are curious, that are open-minded, that are open to other points of view, that can disagree, and then also that's very useful. Then you can become a little bit ambassadors, and okay, I didn't know that immigrants, blah, blah, blah. And even if you share that 2 factoids, it's helpful. And then I have a book called Immigration Realities that goes over some of these myths. But community events where I was in a church on Friday talking about these issues, and it was a beautiful community response. And then the people there in the audience, they want to learn more and they want to change their point of view. And I think it spreads. So, but again, if you have any ideas about how we can reach more people to tell this type of stories, let us know. Because now that you are outside of, some of you are outside of the walls of university, you have a better sense about what people know about us, how they see us, and how we can be more of service to American society. Because going back to the last question briefly, an attack, people don't see this, but an attack on universities, an attack of American universities is an attack on the American people. It's an attack to the project of the middle class. It's an attack of social mobility. So it's connected. It's very connected. Thank you.
I don't know if this is an easy answer for how to scale, but thinking about how do we teach teachers to teach citizenship and civic education? How do we do that better, right? I don't know right now in this moment, but what I'm excited about is that civic education is having a moment. Like, I've been doing this work for so long, and it's always been marginalized, and it's always been about math scores and reading scores and bringing up literacy. And I think at this time, this moment in time in the US, we are having a moment, and we're opening up this conversation again about how do you teach citizenship, how do you teach civics, how do you teach political literacy and digital literacy, part of that, to your comment about disinformation. And so I'm excited because I think there is now this space to think about how can we do this better? How can we do this more effectively? How can we rethink teacher ed to prepare teachers? And then later, professional development as well, right? Like a teacher's life, they're just not the same teacher when they graduate from our program in School of Ed as they are 20 or 30 years later, right? But then how do we address that across a teacher's life? So I don't know, I'm excited about those questions. I'm looking forward to again, civic ed having this moment.
I'll say really briefly, I'm always thinking about how to scale these initiatives. I know the Black Audit, we also have partnered with the University of Miami, the University of Dayton, Delaware, University of Delaware, and we're constantly looking for ways to partner with higher education institutions in other countries. You know, we've approached Colombia, Brazil, so the partnership model is one way to scale. And to the extent that these partnerships can go beyond simply just programs or departments to include entire universities, you can really find a large amount of engagement that's on the table. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for these partnerships that I've found around the world. So I think that's another piece of the puzzle when it comes to bringing these to scale.
Thank you. I believe we have time for one more question.
I hate to end on a downer.
It's not a downer.
I spent 30 years at the Association of American Colleges and Universities working under Carol Schneider as president. And the office I ran was called the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Global Initiatives. So for 30 years, I worked to weave together the notion that you can't have a functioning, vibrant democracy until you recognize it's a democracy that works for everyone. And you can't have just individuals getting what they need if they're not really part of talking to each other in a kind of social context. And we worked with faculty, with administrators, with deans. We set up diversity programs. We had diversity run through the curriculum because it was essentially a diversity-free curriculum in 1990 when we started. And within, 36 hours after being elected, an executive order made all that illegal. And in the federal government, the first people to go were people who ran diversity programs. But then higher ed just folded like a deck of cards and said, okay, we'll get rid of them all or we'll change it. I still read diverse in higher education. It is now called EduLedger, which I can hardly pronounce. Hasn't changed the inside. I guess that's okay, but it's stealing the language. What does it mean not to talk about diversity or equity or inclusion? And the fact that you're actually, and so my question to you is, what are the solutions, though it seems like you're just going ahead and doing the Black Audit right in DeSantis's land with the University of Miami, where he says, we can't teach in any way that makes white people uncomfortable. And if you did a black audit, that's going to make some white people uncomfortable. Why just black people? So you're just going ahead and doing it and find the people that will do it. But my real question, is how are you doing what you're doing? Though I picked up the fact that a lot of what you talked about was global. In this environment, which is hostile to everything and is trying to shut down the possibility of having this conversation about how diversity is critical if we're going to have a functional democracy, and that it is critical to higher ed being able to do its work in educating students. We need everybody there to educate us. So I don't want to end negatively, so I wanted to see how you're doing it in spite of this incredibly hostile environment where the university seems to have said, we won't do this anymore.
One thing I was going to say is thank you for that question. And one of the keys to success is the words we use, right? What's in the name? So instead of using diversity, we talk about internationalization. And having a framework come from the UN Forum on People of African Descent, mandating a data collection project is very different from a DEI program that is excluding people based on race. So at this stage in the discourse, perhaps this is our privilege, the internationalist lens has not been banned in the way that the diversity lens has been banned. So this lens, this platform that we have in many ways is a acceptable pivot, or at least a pivot that cannot be initially just slammed with the same force as it might be if we had used other language and other frameworks. And being in the higher education space, as you said, you're at one of the main target points. The target is on the back of higher education. So you're right. There are a lot of institutions that would be very, very afraid of doing anything that might be construed as promoting, say, racial equality, which is it's a crazy thing to say that we're in this space. But being able to do something that is using an international platform like the UN, or something that is based on an exchange of ideas coming from a global environment is something that is not outlawed yet. We're not outlawed on our internationalization projects yet. So that was my little trick.
I think there's multiple layers to your question, right? So you're looking at it from a very large macro view that I think a lot of administrators have to deal with this, but I just show up to my classes. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. I just show up and I teach, and we talk about difference, and and I'm open and curious. I want my students to be open and curious, and I want them to solve problems, and I want them to do it respectfully, and that's what I do. And that's what I do every day, and just one foot in front of the other, and I just keep showing up. That is my answer.
And while in science fiction or in fiction we may have Orwell, right? Like the thought of the state, and the government can dictate what citizens can think. In my 26 years in America, I never seen that to be true. Americans are free thinkers, and even though what the government says, they have their own thoughts. And we just show that there's not a single thought. There's diversity, disagreement, different political views, and voting still matters. So I'm very hopeful, and the work that you did for 30 years is still showing, because the people that have gone to college in the last decades, they learned that. And once somebody learns something that rings true, you cannot unlearn it. So even though if the government may allow it, it doesn't mean that people are going to stop thinking it. That's impossible. And then the public university in Florida has different ways to do it, and they have to pretend that they're going to do it differently. But for example, at American University, we still talk about inclusive excellence, and we're proud of it. And we know that to be excellent, we have to be open to diversity, because the meritocracy really means that some people, regardless of their gender, their background, are going to rise to the top, and then you have to support them. So we're leading it, we're doing it, and that's going to outlive whatever regulations are in the books right now. That's not going to be the case a few years from now.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your thoughtful questions and the responses. From what I hear, when there's a will, there's a way, and just keep showing up, and we will be able to move forward together. Today, we have heard how higher education is far more than a pipeline to professions. It's a lifeline for democracy, diplomacy, and shared humanity. From migration to civic education to justice, our panelists reminded us that when we invest in learning, we invest in peace. Thank you to our incredible panelists, Ernesto, Justin, and Elizabeth, and to all of you for joining us. We invite you to keep the conversation going with the School of Education at the Big Ideas That Matter podcast, where we continue asking, why this big idea now? Thank you.